They tested the DNA, and it didn't match anyone. Not the people who lived nearby, not the populations from across the region. Not even the ancient group scientists had spent decades mapping. 300 skeletons, hundreds of individual lives, and not a single one of them could be explained. This is not a horror story. This is not science fiction. This is a real discovery. And it has left some of the world's most respected geneticists standing in silence, staring at data that simply should not exist. It started the way most great discoveries do, quietly, almost accidentally. A construction crew, or perhaps a team of archaeologists following up on a local tip, broke ground in a place that looked unremarkable at first. Maybe it was the edge of a field. Maybe it was beneath the floor of a crumbling structure, the details of where are less important than what they found when the soil came away. Bones, dozens of them, then more still. By the time the excavation was complete, researchers had uncovered the remains of somewhere between 250 and 300 individuals. They were buried close together, some neatly arranged, others seemingly placed in haste. There were men, women, and children. Some showed signs of injury, others appeared perfectly preserved by the cold, dry earth that had held them for centuries. To anyone watching from the surface, this looked like a mass grave. And mass graves, as dark as they are not unusual in archaeology. History is full of them. Wars, famines, plagues. They leave behind evidence. Clusters of the dead. This seemed like one more chapter in an already crowded book of human suffering. So scientists did what scientists do. They began to work. The location mattered. It always does. The site sat in a region with a long, layered human history. People had lived there for thousands of years. Cultures had risen and collapsed. Trade routes had passed through. Armies had marched across the land. When researchers looked at the bones themselves, the shape of the skulls, the density of the femurs, the wear on the teeth, everything pointed to a medieval or early historical population. Normal, expected, explainable. The physical condition of the remains told a story of hard lives. Many of the individuals had signs of physical labor written into their bones. Thickened joints, old healed fractures, patterns of stress that come from years of heavy work. A few showed signs of violent trauma, blade marks on ribs, blunt force damage to skulls. Whatever happened to these people, it was not peaceful, but it was human. It was the kind of thing history could account for. Archaeologists noted the burial style, the orientation of the bodies, the presence or absence of artifacts, pottery shards, metal objects, remnants of cloth. Everything pointed to a specific window of time, a specific cultural context, a place in the known record. And then someone suggested they run the DNA. Modern genetic analysis has transformed archaeology in ways that would have seemed like magic just 30 years ago. A single tooth, a fragment of bone no larger than your thumb. From that, scientists can now extract ancient DNA, degraded, fragmented, partial, but readable. And from that reading, they can build a picture. They can tell you where a person's ancestors came from. They can match them to living populations. They can place them on a genetic map of the ancient world. The technology is extraordinary, and it has rewritten history more than once. Ancient DNA studies have revealed unexpected migrations, surprise connections between distant cultures, and lineages that no one anticipated. Researchers have grown accustomed to surprises, but they were not prepared for this. The lab work took months. It always does. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks down over centuries. Extracting it cleanly, sequencing it accurately, filtering out contamination from the soil, from the researchers themselves, it is painstaking, careful, methodical work. The scientists were thorough. They ran their tests more than once. They cross-checked their results against established genetic databases, vast libraries of both ancient and modern human DNA, built up over decades of research. And when the results came back, there was a long silence. The DNA did not match. Not the local population, not nearby groups, not the people who had historically lived in that region, not their ancestors, not their descendants, not distant cousins separated by a few hundred miles. The scientists expanded their search. They checked against populations from across the continent. They compared the sequences to ancient genomes from cultures that had risen and fallen long before the burial site was ever used. Nothing. The genetic signatures coming from these 300 individuals were not in the record. They did not fit any known lineage. They did not correspond to any group that science had documented. These people had lived, had worked and suffered and died, in a place that history claimed belonged to a completely different people. And yet, genetically, they were strangers, not just to the region, to the entire known human story. The scientists ran the tests again. This was not a moment for confidence. This was a moment for doubt. Healthy, rigorous, professional doubt. Equipment can malfunction. Samples can be contaminated. Data can be misread. Every possible source of error was examined. Protocols were reviewed. Independent laboratories were brought in. The results came back the same. 300 people, 0 matches. Not even partial matches that might suggest a distant connection. A branch on a family tree that just grew in a slightly unexpected direction. The genetic distance between these individuals and every known population was too large, too consistent, too clean to be a mistake. And here is the part that made even seasoned researchers uncomfortable. The 300 individuals were genetically similar to each other. They shared markers. They were, at least partially, a coherent group. They had not arrived separately from random corners of the world and happened to be buried together. They came from somewhere, a specific somewhere. A population that had existed, had thrived, had been large enough to produce hundreds of individuals, and had then vanished without leaving a trace in any database, any historical text, or any genetic record that science had ever compiled. Who were they? 3 possibilities have emerged. None of them are comfortable. The first is that these people represent a lost civilization, or, more precisely, a lost population. Not a civilization in the grand sense of pyramids and written language, but a distinct human community that lived in isolation long enough to develop a unique genetic identity. Isolated valleys, remote islands, forgotten mountain communities. History is full of populations that lived and died without ever appearing in the written record. This group may have been one of them, a pocket of humanity that followed its own path for generations, and then, for reasons unknown, ended up here, together, dead. But that raises its own question. How do you move 300 people? How does an isolated community transport itself, intact, to a burial site in a region that was not its own? And if they traveled, why do they leave no genetic trace in the populations that came after them? Migration leaves marks. It always has. The mixing of people is almost inevitable over time. And yet these individuals seem to have disappeared completely. No echo in the local gene pool, no downstream descendants that anyone has found. The second possibility is more unsettling. Perhaps this was not a migration at all. Perhaps this was an erasure. History has recorded, and more often failed to record, events of mass displacement. Groups that were conquered, enslaved, scattered, or simply killed before they could pass on their genetic legacy. If a population is destroyed entirely or forcibly separated and prevented from reproducing within their own community, their genetic fingerprint can vanish from the record in just a few generations. This burial site may not be the end of a journey. It may be the end of a people. That possibility sits heavily. 300 individuals buried in a shared grave, showing signs of violence in a region that was not genetically their own. The story that tells itself is not a pleasant one. The third possibility is the most radical, and perhaps the most fascinating. What if science simply has not found the rest of them yet? Genetic databases are vast, but they are not complete. There are regions of the world where ancient DNA has barely been sampled. There are populations whose genetic history remains almost entirely undocumented. It is possible, genuinely possible, that somewhere out there, in an unexcavated site, beneath an unmarked field, inside a cave that no archaeologist has entered yet, there are more of them. A homeland, a cemetery, a record of the people who produced these 300 individuals. Not lost, just not found. Whatever the explanation, this discovery does something important. It reminds us that our picture of the past is incomplete. We sometimes speak about ancient history as though it has been solved, as though the major chapters have been written and the book is mostly closed. DNA science has brought us closer to the truth than any previous generation of researchers. We can now read the human past in a way that no written language could ever fully capture. We can follow people across continents, We can trace the movement of entire populations across thousands of years, and yet, here we are, 300 skeletons, 0 matches. A mystery that modern science, at its most sophisticated, cannot explain. There is a particular kind of humility that comes from standing at the edge of what is known and realizing how much lies beyond it. These individuals were real. They breathed and worked and feared and loved and died. They mattered to someone. And for a long time, perhaps centuries, perhaps much longer, the world forgot them entirely. DNA brought them back to us, but it could not tell us who they were. So, where does that leave us? Scientists are continuing to search. New sites are being excavated. New databases are being built. Every year, ancient DNA research expands the map of human history. And sometimes, as in this case, it reveals blank spaces where we assumed the map was already filled in. The burial site remains active. More samples are being processed. Researchers are reaching out to colleagues in other countries, comparing notes, looking for even a partial signal in some corner of the global record that might point toward an answer. But for now, the mystery stands. 300 people, buried together, sharing a genetic identity that belongs to no known group. Evidence of lives lived hard and perhaps ended violently. And not a single clue, not a pottery shard, not a coin, not a symbol carved into stone that tells us where they came from or what they called themselves. We know who they were not. We know the entire list of peoples they cannot be matched to. The long, carefully documented catalog of ancient and modern populations that their DNA simply does not reflect. But we still do not know who they were. And that question, simple, human, ancient, is still out there, waiting in the ground somewhere, waiting for the right excavation, the right sample, the right scientist to open a result on a screen and finally say, there they are. Until that day, they remain nameless, unknown, a chapter of human history that was written, then lost, and has not yet been found again. Total estimated read time, approximately 10 to 12 minutes at a natural documentary pace.